Access to water, medical treatment, medical supplies.
Which areas of or group of people need the most support right now?
Ukraine Red Cross Society is in the driving seat and we are Sturman.
Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
This is something that we continue, but definitely a bit more decreased than in the beginning.
What you learned?
We are suffering, but the programming, we could still maintain it, which is important.
The war in Ukraine has changed millions of lives. Humanitarian needs are still growing, especially in frontline regions. Today we speak with Майкл Кремер, Director of International Cooperation at Swiss Red Cross. Hi Michael, I'm glad to welcome you in our studio. How would you describe the current humanitarian situation in Ukraine?
Thank you, Alexei, and thank you for the honor of inviting me as representative of Swiss Red Cross. I think the humanitarian situation in Ukraine is a very complex one because you have different realities in the country. You have the areas close to the front line where you have hostilities happening, very much exposed population there with very basic needs of access to water, medical treatment, medical supplies, access to hygiene kits, to food. Then you have, of course, the consequences of the airstrikes with people dying, getting injured, losing their households, losing their belongings. Also big psychological effects, of course, of the warfare on people, because this conflict has been going on for 11 years and the escalation for 3 years now. So this burden on people, you feel it more and more. I think there's even if you're not directly affected, it affects you because you have lost family members, friends due to the conflict, the constant attacks. It weighs very heavy on you, the worry for your family members. Very, very difficult for all Ukrainians, I would say. And then you have another reality, maybe in areas which are not directly affected by hostilities, where you have many people who have fled to those areas, so there are more people to be taken care of by the health system, by the social services. So there's a lot of different realities in the country, and this is a big challenge for Ukraine as a country, for its population, but also for us as a Red Cross Crescent movement to respond to that.
Which areas of or group of people need the most support right now?
Very difficult to say, so I wouldn't prioritize, but definitely the people close to the front line. I think that's the emergency response. If you look at Kherson, if you look at Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv, Lugansk, Kherson Oblasts, I think they're definitely directly affected by the conflict with basic needs. But then also in other areas affected by airstrikes, not by direct hostilities and fighting. But there also the needs are significant with regard to emergency response after air attacks, and also taking care of the needs of the resident population, but also host families, for example, taking in the internally displaced population. There are specific needs there. There are rehabilitation efforts to be done, physical rehabilitation, psychological, and also a certain level of reconstruction of housing institutions, etc. There's the elderly population, the people with disabilities that continue having their needs. Question of loneliness in society is probably more acute now than it has been before the escalation of the conflict. So difficult to make a prioritization, but it touches upon all levels of society in Ukraine, I would say.
I will turn back for recovery. Is it not too early for this word, maybe? Because war goes.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I think I think the full-scale recovery, reconstruction of the country that is probably very difficult to implement given the current situation and the pressure on the country. But we can talk about early recovery, we can talk about rehabilitation of infrastructure, basic infrastructure for the population to be able to live a decent life on that level, very much so, or rehabilitation of sanatoria, of clinics, of hospitals, to adapt it to the new situation. I think that's very, very much necessary. So, but you're right, it depends a little bit on the focus, what we understand under recovery. Yes.
How do you decide what kind of aid to focus on?
Swiss Red Cross?
Yes.
Well, for us, it's very clear that we understand ourselves as part of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, and it's us supporting Ukrainian Red Cross Society, URCS, in that very much. That's a given. So it's very important that we are complementary to other national societies, to the ICRC, to IFRC in the country. We might very much want to listen to Ukrainian Red Cross. What are their needs? So for us, it's a little bit of a mix to what we said in the beginning. What are the needs? We very much want to continue focusing on humanitarian aid, humanitarian support, with a strong focus on us supporting the URCS branch in Kherson, in branch development, but also in humanitarian response. And then is probably more the focus on rehabilitation of infrastructure, livelihood programs, cash programs that we had, particularly in the beginning of the escalation, developed in Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil, Kropotnitsky, where we had a branch development focus from the very beginning. We want to continue supporting in the branch development because we think those are the entities closest to the people in need, on local level, on regional level, but always in clear transparency with the national committee here. And then we also have, let's say, certain capacities as Swiss Red Cross, certain core competencies that where we provide a technical accompaniment and assistance and expertise to Ukrainian Red Cross, and that's particularly in healthy aging, home-based care, and in the fundraising sector, where we want to remain strongly engaged. Not only now, but we've been discussing that we want to be a long-term, reliable partner to Ukrainian Red Cross, and we're counting of being here and standing by the side of Ukrainian Red Cross Society in the next 10 years. So we're really planning in that respect also with regard to the funding and the reserves that we have.
Has this focus changed over time during the full-scale invasion?
Very much so. I remember I was the team leader of Swiss Red Cross in early March 22. When we entered, we had discussions with the National Committee, how we can support. We were asked to focus our support, the Swiss Red Cross, to Ternopil and Ivano-Frankivsk, where we had already projects before the escalation in home-based care, without having had a physical presence though. So there it was very much supporting the regional branches to position themselves in their auxiliary role to the local government, supporting the health system. There were many displaced people moving into those regions in the West. It was also establishing certain capacities in logistics development, in cash support to displaced people, to host families, strengthening the health system with Ukraine Red Cross by supporting the regional health authorities. That was a really important first approach. And then, of course, over time that shifted, and with the strengthening of the regional branches, we got more into a support role, a technical expertise role, accompanying them. We expanded to Kropotnitsky, also remotely taking over the branch development for Kherson and the humanitarian aid in Kherson. And for us, it was also very important to be present on the national committee level in Kiev with this technical expertise and supporting Ukraine Red Cross Society also in these specific fields and understanding ourselves as part of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement to support Ukraine Red Cross Society in this respect.
You told about long-term recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about it? What's your plan?
We're not there yet, but I think Ukraine Red Cross Society has a clear strategy of where they want to go. They're now working on their new strategy, but I think one approach is definitely the development of social services in local, regional levels. And we really want to support the development of those services on all levels. I think this will position the Ukraine Red Cross Society also in the long run to really become or remain a privileged partner to the various authorities of the government on the various authority levels. And this will, I think Ukraine Red Cross Society will have to position itself on many levels, on long-term services provision to the people in need, to the vulnerable population in Ukraine, on a midterm level, in early recovery, but also very, very much so in remaining an important actor in the emergency response, with the emergency response team, with humanitarian aid provision, being very close to the front line to provide that assistance. And I think that's a very, very unique role and mandate that the Ukraine Red Cross Society has in the country. And we want to support the further development and the strengthening of that role.
How do you think how to balance this emergency help and long-term recovery?
It's of course a big challenge, and I've said it before. I mean, we have deep respect how Ukraine Red Cross Society has developed over the last few years. I mean, before the escalation of the conflict, it was a middle-sized humanitarian actor with a big focus on the east and a little bit the south. And now URCS is the biggest humanitarian national actor in Ukraine, and having been able to absorb that is outstanding. It really is, and I think now it's very important to start consolidating a little bit, to strengthen the structures, to be able to be stable, because the funding streams, they will not be here forever. It's important to be prepared with a sound financial structure, with a good strategic focus on that. And I think Ukraine Red Cross Society has that very clear. And I think this strategy process that Ukraine Red Cross Society is undergoing will be very vital for that. And we as Swiss Red Cross and as a movement partner, we will then build into that and support that approach.
How do you work with local authorities and communities in Ukraine, representative of Swiss Red Cross?
Yeah. For us, it's very important that the lead in the engagement with national, regional, local authorities is always with Ukraine Red Cross Society. So I remember the first days in Ivano-Frankivsk and Ternopil. It was very much us encouraging the regional branch to engage and to position Ukraine Red Cross Society, but we would be accompanying them and we clearly see the lead with Ukraine Red Cross Society. If there's a need for us to co-represent, we sometimes sign the tripartite agreements. If we had a technical role as well, but we need to respect the primacy of the Ukraine Red Cross Society in that, and we are supportive in that manner, because visibility needs to be with Ukraine Red Cross, and we are here to support. It's not about us as Swiss Red Cross, it's about strengthening Ukraine Red Cross Society.
Which partners do you work with most closely in Ukraine, except Ukrainian Red Cross?
Basically, it's 80% Ukraine Red Cross Society. Then, of course, it's very important to also consider the other Red Cross Red Crescent movement partners. It's the coordination with the IFRC, with the other national societies present in the country, so that we actually know who is doing what, where, and with which standards. That's very, very important. Also with, of course, acknowledging the important role of ICRC with its clear mandate in conflict situations. Where we have a specific role is also in our relationship with the Swiss government, Swiss Embassy, Swiss Development and Cooperation Office. We have been discussing with the URCS management these days also of maybe engaging with Swiss companies present in Ukraine, how we can link up Ukraine Red Cross societies with such companies, whether a certain level of cooperation is possible with certain Swiss subsidiaries who are present here. So that's where we see basically our role. Yeah.
Can you give an example of successful teamwork?
Difficult to say. You caught me by surprise, Alexei. I think it's the everyday work, and we're very happy. We have, for example, we have 2 delegates who are embedded in Ukraine Red Cross Society teams. One is in healthy aging, in home-based care, where we work very closely with Soya and now Pavlo, the new head of health department. The same goes with the private source domestic fundraising, now the development of this face-to-face public fundraising in the streets that we want to expand. And I think that's real teamwork for us. You know, the Ukraine Red Cross Society is in the driving seat, and we are Sturman, we are passengers, and we provide wherever it is requested. We provide certain technical expertise and building up the capacities together, because we can also learn from this experience as Swiss Red Cross, and we can bring it back to our domestic work that we do. So it's a mutual learning, and I think this is the best approach in teamwork.
Can you give an example of what you learned?
With regard to this example, or when I was in Ukraine, or
as you wish.
Well, there was last week's conference on the lessons learned of the role of national society and the development of national societies in situation of international armed conflict, and I think I took many notes, because I think domestically in our domestic departments and in our domestic positioning with our government in disaster preparedness, crisis preparedness and response, I think we can learn a lot from Ukraine Red Cross Society experience and also their own development in the last few years. How to position ourselves in our auxiliary role with the government. I think we can learn a lot from that, and I've taken a lot of points for action to take home where we need to develop more as Swiss Red Cross domestically. That's just one example of learnings. Yeah.
How has the Ukrainian Red Cross changed since the last time you worked closely with them?
I spent 1.5 years here, from March 22 to September 23, and now coming back in a different role. So I had the pleasure to be head of delegation for IFRC at that time. And as I said before, it's really amazing how, in spite of a full-fledged armed conflict going on and a lot of emergencies, pressure to provide services to the population, to many levels of population. There are a lot of vulnerabilities in the country, of course, that Ukraine Red Cross Society has been able to grow and to grow consistently, and that's extremely difficult in normal times, but all the more difficult in these conflict situation, and it has put a lot of burden on the staff of Ukraine Red Cross Society, working in heavy hours, being completely exhausted, under attack. Also knowing that, I mean, you're Ukrainian citizens, you have your families here, you're affected by their well-being, so you come to work, but you worry about your children and your beloved ones when there is an airstrike and you're not there. So there's double pressure on you, and that I observed the continuous development of Ukraine Red Cross Society.
Do you notice anything different in their work structure or way of responding from last time?
No, I think the dynamics is still there. I think certain processes are now more in place, and there's probably a certain routine there, which is also very important. And it probably gives Ukraine Red Cross Society also the necessary time to focus now on their new strategy, on their statutes, the relationships between National Committee, regional branches, local branches, maybe the interregional offices. I think that's also very important not to forget that, to focus on the governments, on the organizational, legal, structural development of Ukraine Red Cross Society. I think this focus now on consolidating and further developing is going to be very, very crucial. And I think URCS has started with that process. Yeah.
Does your experience changed from working with Ukrainian Red Cross Society?
Yeah, I think the early hours, Swiss Red Cross, we were one of the first national societies to be present 2 weeks after the escalation, and of course many things were ad hoc there. Also, URCS was under a lot of attacks. Headquarters was relocating to Vinnytsia, so you had to be first. URCS had to be sure that its staff is safe and sound and can start working again. I think there was a little bit of an ad hoc time, and now I think the processes are already much more developed. I think there's still a long way to go because of the growth and the size of Ukraine Red Cross Society, which is very normal. But yeah, I think you can still feel the humanity and the desire of Ukraine Red Cross Society to be there for the people of Ukraine, and that's very exemplary.
What plans for humanitarian work in Ukraine in next year or two?
We have established now the country strategy for Swiss Red Cross 25 to 28, so we have a clear commitment over the next years. Also, the attribution of funds and budget is more or less clear. And we have discussed with Ukraine Red Cross Society what our focus is going to be. So it's the technical support in home-based care, healthy aging, fundraising. It's also continued support to the branch development, working with the interregional offices to support them, provide support services, supporting the development of the social services in the branches, and this programming humanitarian focus, because the needs in humanitarian aid are going to remain very, very high, and we want to continue contributing to that with a specific focus on Kherson as well. There's also been quite a support in livelihood, in supporting displaced people more in the west or in the center of Ukraine. This is something that we continue, but definitely a bit more decreased than in the beginning. Yeah.
How do you think is funding for Ukraine become harder to find?
I think so. We are living in a world that information-wise is very fast-paced. Normally the world is capable of putting attention on a context for a few months, not more, and then you have the next hot topic popping up, and surprisingly and unfortunately, Ukraine has remained high on the agenda of many countries, and we hope that this will remain the case. But we have other conflicts going on in the Middle East now, if we look at that, and there are other crises popping up, of course. So unfortunately, it will depend a lot on that information, media competition. But I think it's also our job as Swiss Red Cross and other national societies and Federation and ICRC to do humanitarian diplomacy and remind the public in Switzerland, remind the authorities in Switzerland that there remains a big need in humanitarian support, midterm support, even a little bit of development, recovery support in certain fields. So we will be advocating and pushing for that very much. But we are not in early 22. The attention span is a bit lower, but this is one of our tasks, to be able to support Ukrainian Red Cross Society also in the provision of funding and programming, of course.
About funding, how are you preparing for possible budget cuts?
I think the pressure is almost worldwide, not all national societies, but I would say 80% of national societies that have international programs are affected by that. What we have seen in the US is probably a very, very radical and extreme image of that, but we have had this tendency in many countries in Europe already, the pressure on funding. In Switzerland, we also observe there is an increased focus and a bigger budget on the defense side, and somewhere it's going to be cut, and it has been in the development sphere, so that puts a lot of pressure on us. To a certain extent, we've been able to foresee that a little bit and have adapted it. So far we are suffering, but the programming we could still maintain it, which is important. But we are not so optimistic that this tendency will be reversed, and I think the pressure on funding for humanitarian and development work, particularly development work, will be quite high in most European countries and North American countries as well, I would say. Yeah.
What are the biggest safety or logistics challenges your team face in Ukraine?
Well, safety and security, I think, is like for most Ukrainians. It's with time you feel a certain tiredness, because of the existence and the reality of an international armed conflict. Even if Kiev or many cities or regions in Ukraine are not directly affected by hostilities, you have the air attacks, you have the sirens, so you feel the conflict, and so I think there's a certain tiredness there. Of course, there is also a certain risk, like for all Ukrainians as well, with regard to the situations of armed conflict and its consequences. That's definitely the biggest security threat. Logistics-wise, before 22, Zurich to Kiev was 2.5 hours. Now it's 1.5 days, and it's not as close as it used to be, and not as easy to travel as it used to be. But that's the realities that we work in. Yeah.
How do you make sure aid reaches people in hard to reach areas like the front lines and others?
Well, our main focus where we support Ukrainian Red Cross Society is Kherson Oblast and the regional branch in Kherson. We do not implement ourselves. It's really us supporting Ukrainian Red Cross societies. I think for us it's very important that we have a very good planning, reporting, evaluation, monitoring system to really ensure that the humanitarian aid gets to where it has to go. But there we work very closely with Ukrainian Red Cross Society in that respect, and we rely on the professionalism of URCS on all levels. Yeah.
Do you have any words for Ukrainians?
It's a very sad, very tragic situation that the country has to undergo, and I just wish Ukraine and the Ukrainians all the best and health and a positive outcome of this. It requires a lot of strength and stamina and energy and positivity, and that's very, very difficult. And conflict and war always causes suffering, and this is very, very sad, and I'm very touched that this is happening in this country in this century. And we try to stand by Ukrainian Red Cross Society as long as it's necessary and as much as we can, because we think URCS has a very, very important role in providing humanitarian assistance and support to the people in need of Ukraine. And that's my words. Yeah.
That was all questions. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Alexei.
honest answers. Thanks for watching. Follow Humanitarian Media Hub for more interesting interviews.